Welcome to our workshop today. As you can see, it's called Discovering Your Unique Money Personality. And we are running this today in conjunction with Mary Waring. She's a chartered financial planner and money mindset coach. And she's been involved in the financial world for probably more years than she'd care to remember. I'm Alison Green. I'm partner and head of the family and relationship team here at Mackrell.Solicitors. And the idea for the workshop actually came from a conversation that Mary and I had a couple of months ago when we were catching up. And we were talking about people's relationships with money and how they deal with it, not only in my world, family relationships, but also in terms of inheritances and anywhere where people come into money maybe unexpectedly and are not quite sure how then to deal with it. And what became apparent from the conversation that I had with Mary at that point was people's relationships differ with money. We don't all have the same thought process. And because of that change or differences in relationships, that affects the decisions that you take in relation to money, how you deal with it, how you invest it, and the sort of decisions that you actually take. So, as we say, everyone has a unique money personality, and that's what Mary's going to talk about today. So I'm going to hand you over to Mary. Just before I do, actually, I should say we will take questions at the end if there's time. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Please put your questions in there rather than in the chat box. And then only Mary and I can see those. So we'll answer what we can at the end. So, Mary.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for everyone being on the call live. Yeah, we're talking about unique money personality. So really, I guess the first question is, why would you want to know what your personality is? And it's going to be really helpful in explaining to you how you think, feel, behave around money. So if we think of an example of, imagine if all of a sudden today, this afternoon, you received an amount of money that you just weren't expecting. So that could be, for example, I don't know, you get a bonus at work. If you're running your own business, you have a really great client sign up. Maybe you have a win on the premium bonds, the lottery. So think about, you have an amount of money come in this afternoon, you weren't expecting it. What are you going to do with it? Now, one example would be someone who says, fantastic, I've had this money coming in, I'm so excited, I'm going to go out and buy myself something nice. I'm really going to treat myself. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a thing. It could be somebody thinks, oh, I'm going to have a day at the spa. I'm going to go for afternoon tea, have a weekend away, dependent on the amount of money. And that person is going to be really excited about spending the money and enjoying it. So is that you? Someone else might think, fantastic, it's so lovely to get this money. I'm going to save it. I'm going to put it in my pension. I'm going to put it in my investments. I'm going to keep it for future years because at some point I might not be earning the same amount I'm earning now. Maybe I want to cut down on my hours and I'm going to use it then. Or, similar, it's the same sort of approach might be, I'm going to pay my mortgage down because again, in future years, I don't need so much money. Is that you? Or someone else might think, this is lovely. I wasn't expecting it. And you know what? I don't desperately need this money, but I don't know, my son, my daughter, my brother, my sister, my best friend has got some money worries. I'm going to gift it to them because I think they will get a lot more use out of it than me. And, there's going to be more examples, or it could be a bit of one, a bit of the other. But just if you think 3 different examples there of people experiencing the same situation and how they dealt very differently with it. And that's to do with their personality. And we will come on later and look at some of that. Now, knowing your personality is also going to help you identify the strengths. But wherever there's a strength, there is also going to be a challenge. Often, if a strength is taken to an extreme. Now, there's no one personality, money personality that's better than another. And there's no one personality that is more likely to be wealthy or more likely to lose their money. This is about, finding out information about your personality. So can you imagine the three individuals we looked at the beginning? If you wanted to start saying to the person who wanted to spend it all and got a lot of enjoyment out of spending, imagine saying to them, no, you've got to save it. They're going to be really unhappy. They're just not going to enjoy it at all. The person who enjoyed saving it, if you said to them, no, you need to go out and spend it, again, they're not going to get the same amount of enjoyment out of spending as they did out of saving. So it's not about trying to change your personality at all. It's about understanding the strengths of your personality. And then as far as you can, you downplay your challenges. So the question comes up, well, where does your personality come from? Now, there's a lot of evidence which would say your beliefs, and particularly your subconscious beliefs, are formed during the first 7 years of your childhood. Now, for most of us up to that age, we probably didn't know a lot about money. We may have got some pocket money, but probably we weren't going out and buying things. Stuff was being bought for us. But we would have learnt a lot about money from what we heard from our parents, our guardians, our grandparents, whoever it is we spent a lot of time around. So did you hear these sorts of comments? I can't afford it. If you were told frequently, I can't afford it, you can't have it, you're going to form a certain opinion around money. If you're told, well, we just don't have enough money for that, that is going to influence your views when you're growing up. And you may not have understood a lot around money, particularly up to the age 7, but you would have understood the emotion. So if your parents argued a lot around money, you would have picked up on that. You may not have understood the arguments, but you would have picked up that there was a lot of unpleasant emotion around money. And I'd say, what are you saying to yourself now? Are you saying these sorts of things? Are you saying, I can't afford it? Now, I rarely say I can't afford it. And not because I have so much money, I can afford everything. It's because most people saying I can't afford it, what they really mean is that isn't of value to me. I don't want to spend that amount of money. As an example, I am not a foodie. I'm just not. I don't eat out at expensive restaurants because it's just not me. If somebody invited me to some very flash restaurant for a very expensive meal, I would probably say no. The only reason I'd go would be to connect with others, but I wouldn't want to pay that amount of money for that sort of experience because I just wouldn't get value from it. But if somebody instead said to me, oh, we're going to go for a day at the spa and it costs whatever amount, and that's the same amount as the meal that I probably wouldn't have wanted to go to, I'd have said, yeah, for the spa, I can't wait. A lot of people, when they say I can't afford it, are saying, I have got money, but I don't want to spend this amount of money on that. And that's very different. See, if you change your what you're saying to yourself, and if you say things like, that's not a priority for me, I don't want to spend that amount of money. It's not in my budget. All of a sudden, that gives you an awful lot more control around money than I can't afford it. And there will be occasions when you can't afford it because it's something you'd really like to do, but you don't have the money in the bank for that. But again, the approach there would be to say, I haven't got the money at the minute. I am going to save X pounds a month. And in whatever period of time, I've got that amount of money and I'm really going to look forward to spending it on whatever. Again, that's put you back in control around your money. From anyone who heard growing up, money is the root of all evil, that is actually a misquote from the Bible. The Bible verse actually says the love of money is the root of all evil. My interpretation of that is if the one and only thing that's important to you is getting more and more money, well, then personally, I don't think you're making great decisions. You're going to have a total lack of empathy for anyone else. You won't care how much money somebody else loses, provided you make money. And therefore, it's very different to say the love of money is the root of all evil, as opposed to money is the root of all evil. So think about, what did you hear about money growing up? Does this sound familiar? What are you saying to yourself now? And for anyone with children, grandchildren, what messages are you giving them? And if you're giving any of these types of messages, I would urge you to start reframing. So the thing about I can't afford it could be, it's not in the budget. That, I prefer to spend that money on something different. What about if you heard some of these messages? Money is fun. I always have enough money. You're going to have such a different approach to money than if you heard the earlier messages. And if we think about an example, and I've just spotted a typo, I always manage to save. That should say I always manage to save. For anyone who's thinking, what does manage mean? I shall correct that. If you think about an example, if your parents came home, when you were a youngster, your parents came home and one parent had received, a bonus, the way we just looked at an example earlier. And if you all sat around discussing what would you spend it on? Are you going to have a weekend away? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And it was all very exciting, lots of options coming up. You were discussing it, and maybe you got a little bit of extra pocket money that week. You are going to grow up thinking, well, money is really exciting. Isn't it great when you've got money because it allows you to do lots of fun things? Now, we attach a lot of emotion to money, either in this, guilt, shame, fear, embarrassment area, or, joy, fun, excitement. And one thing to be aware of, guilt, shame, fear is not only for people with low funds. I've worked with a number of people who have a lot of money and they have fear. They have fear about what to do with it, how to invest it, fear about, is there enough of it? They have guilt around, well, how come I've got this amount of money and others haven't? Remember the example we did about at the beginning, the person who would prefer to gift money to others. I'm not saying that you do that just for fear, for embarrassment, but there is an issue with a lot of people with money as to, whoa, I've got a lot more money than others. Is this right? But it's actually not helpful to attach emotion to money. Money is purely a means of exchange. If you think back to, and I don't know when money was invented, but if you think back to pre-money, if you had chickens and they were laying a whole load of eggs, you had more eggs than you needed. your neighbour had cows and your neighbour had a whole load of milk. Well, you'd come up with some uh, way of saying, I'm going to give you this amount of eggs and you're going to give me this amount of milk. And you're both really, really happy. But what happens when your neighbour has got eggs and they don't want eggs anymore, but they've still got the milk that you want? This is why money came into being, so that your eggs you sell to whoever wants eggs, they give you money, and you then use that money to buy the milk from your neighbour. It was only ever meant to be a means of exchange. And yet at the minute, so often we add emotion around the money. You know, money is good, money is bad. Money itself isn't any of these things. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and why I now teach in this area, because actually I effectively became my first client and I worked all this out to help myself and then thought, oh, well, if I have these issues that need dealing with, probably others do as well. I have endless qualifications around money. You know, if you look at, do I know how to make money, how to manage money, how to invest it, how to grow it, how to budget it? I know loads. I know absolutely loads. But I had huge limiting beliefs around money. Now, we spoke earlier that a lot of your beliefs around money are formed in the early years, and that's exactly where my beliefs came from. So I was brought up in a household with very limited funds, and that's actually because my father was an alcoholic. My father drank it all. So there was a lack of money. There was often arguments around money. Uh, it was a very unhappy marriage, but my mother had no money in her own name. She wasn't earning, but also she was an educated woman. So even if she decided, well, I'm going to go out and get a job, she was never going to earn enough to look after herself and three children. So she was effectively trapped, which meant from an early age, the belief I picked up was money gives you power. And actually, money doesn't give you power, but it gives you options. It will often give you options that aren't available. But in my head, I was thinking money gives you power. And I also thought if you don't have money, you're trapped. So, not surprisingly, I decided from an early age, I'm never going to be in the same position as my mother. I am going to go out and get a whole load of qualifications, which is absolutely what I did, so that I am always going to be financially independent. And certainly during primary school, I wasn't really aware that other people had more money than I did. And that was a function of the time. You know, we didn't have phones, we didn't buy the latest trainers and stuff like that. So it was just a different time that I think, you know, we went out and played in the park or whatever it is. And therefore, the money issue I just wasn't aware of. But as soon as I went to secondary school, I became really aware of that. That the group of friends I was hanging out with, they had more money than me to go out and go to the cinema or whatever it was, to go shopping. And I became really aware, wow, you know, I've got a lot less money than other people have. And what I did, I went out and got a job. I got a job at about age 13. I'm not sure what age you're allowed to work now, but I mean, you were then. I got a Saturday job. Well, it was a Saturday job. I didn't stop school. It was a Saturday job. And I worked in a hairdresser. So that was, you know, sweeping up the hair, making the tea, putting the wet towels wherever you put them. And actually, that felt fantastic because all of a sudden, I had some money. And that was really, really important to me. And I kept working on a Saturday. I worked on a Saturday up until probably the second year of university. Now, nobody else that I knew at all at uni was working. And what happened, you'd go out Friday night, you'd have a late night, come back at whatever time, and I'd get up in the morning and go to work. And it didn't occur to me not to go to work because, again, I wanted to make sure I had the right amount of money. But what's really interesting is I then ended up with more money than my friends because, on a Saturday, they were going out, going to the pub, going to eat, whatever it was during the day, and they were spending money. I wasn't spending money because I was going to work and I was earning. And then, so I went from sort of age 13, being hugely embarrassed and ashamed that I had so much less money than my friends, to at age, 18, 19, 20, whatever age at uni, was then equally feeling guilty that I had more money than them. And I used to lie about how much money I had. So when my friends were saying, oh, I've got no money left, the bank had bounced my check in those days. And I'd say, yeah, me too. I've never bounced a check in my life. When I went on holiday with a friend of mine I think it was at the end of the first year, and she said, because you pay for your holiday however much in advance, and she said that she was going to work during the summer holidays. She didn't have enough money to pay for the holiday. She had to borrow it from her parents on the understanding she would then pay it back. And I said, yeah, that's what I've done too. Right, I had that money in my bank. So when I started to think about this a while ago, when I was understanding my relationship with money, I just thought, isn't that incredible that the same feelings of being a total outsider in relation to money at age 13, because I didn't have it, was exactly the same feelings I felt at much later age because I had more. And having more, there was also going on then a certain amount of, well, who am I to have so much more money than my friends? Do I deserve to have this amount when they're bouncing checks all over the place? And actually, what it shows is it's not about the money. It's just not about the money. It's to do with what else is going on in our head, but we express it in the way we deal with money. And that's what brought me to looking at, the whole psychology around money. Now, I work with 8 different personalities. And remember, we said at the beginning, it's nothing to do with one is better than the other. It's just explaining how you deal with money. Now, I can't go through all 8 now because we'd be here for much too long. But what I'm going to do is tell you about 3, and I'm going to tell you about my top 3, because then I can really explain to you how they work together. Now, when I work with my clients, I do look at the top 3, because the top 3 of the 8 are what is going to really influence the way you behave. Sometimes I also look at the lowest one as to, is there something in that lowest one that you are deliberately shying away from for whatever reason? Now, the first one I want to talk to you about is the accumulator. Accumulator is actually my second one. But the reason I'm telling you first is, although it's second, in terms of order of strength, it has such a major impact on number 1 and number 2. I'm going to tell you about that first. So accumulators are really, really good with money. They love saving money. So the example we did at the beginning of you get money in, what will you do with it? And my second example was you want to save it and you're going to love saving it. That's an accumulator. So the accumulator is rarely going to have debt. Great at budgeting. You've got a budget as to how much you can spend. The accumulator will come in under that budget. Accumulators are just very, very good with money. And therefore, probably not surprising that I'm an accountant, a financial advisor, chartered financial planner. I love money. My brain works really, really well with money. But of course, we have said there's also challenges. It's not all positive. So the challenge about the accumulator is the accumulator sometimes can get so determined to have money that actually they don't spend it. And this isn't they don't spend it because they're being careful. This is you don't spend it because you're overly frugal. The accumulator would be the sort of person who would maybe only buy stuff in a charity shop, even though they have more than enough money to buy elsewhere. There is a huge fear around spending and a huge fear about not having enough. Now, when I first started looking at my relationship with money, I thought, well, my value around money is security. And I thought, well, that's a real plus. That's great, isn't it? But then when I looked at it further, I realized I wasn't saving money to feel secure. I was saving money through a fear of not having money. And that's a very different relationship. And if you've got a fear of not having money, not having enough, you're never going to feel comfortable with money because whatever amount you have, there's always a fear of losing it. There's always a fear that it's not enough. So all these personalities have some great strengths, but taken to an extreme, there can also be challenges there. Now, my number 3 personality is celebrity. And celebrities, you could say, wear their money. You look at this wonderful lady here with a designer Dolce & Gabbana glasses, they're wearing their wealth. They like a lot of bling. Now, if you look at me, I got a bit of a blingy ring. I got a bit of a blingy earring. I like a bit of bling without a doubt. Now, for some celebrities, they believe the money gives them that status and recognition. And this is part of why they wear it, so other people can see it. And it's quite important for them, for others to see it, which is why, they buy brand names. They buy things that have got whatever label on it that someone looking at it will think, oh, she's got a lot of money. But, to look at the challenges, some celebrities spend more money than they have because they want to look good. So, the point that, the image doesn't necessarily match their bank account. If you know someone who's got a very, very big house, you don't know whether they've got an enormous mortgage on it. And celebrities can overspend, can get into debt, because this is all about, being on show. So even if they don't have enough money, they may well always have, the latest iPhone, the latest this, that, and everything. And sometimes that does come from not having unconditional love and approval as a child. And this is why it's important for them to be showing everyone else, look, I'm good enough. I am unlikely to experience any of these challenges with celebrity because my accumulator just it wouldn't let me. I am not going to be a compulsive spender. I am not going to get myself in debt by buying the latest brands and everything else, because my accumulator would have too much fear about that. And similarly, if we look back, we said, one of the challenges of the accumulator was being overly frugal. This is where my celebrity can kick in. And my celebrity can encourage me to buy some nice things. Like I bought myself a nice ring, nice earrings, because otherwise my accumulator probably wouldn't spend anything at all. So these two characters for me work nicely together. I believe I'm picking up a lot of strengths of each of them, but without having too big a concern about the challenges, because they actually cancel one another out a little bit. My top character is Maverick, and Mavericks always want to do things differently, and that's why they stand out. Mavericks always have a better way of doing something. They're not going to follow the norm. And again, this is quite me in a lot of ways. In terms of money, Mavericks can often get attracted to almost like a get-rich-quick scheme. And they're really keen to take financial risk because they're looking at the gain. They're not thinking about, well, I might lose money. They are only thinking about the gain that's available to them. But it's not surprising that if you want to consider, what are the challenges that might be there, well, some Mavericks will also have big losses, probably big gains, but probably losses. So their money may well go like this. They make a lot of money, but then they lose it. But then they make a lot of money again, but then they lose it. It's because they're looking for the highs. And in most cases, an extreme increase in wealth has a risk attached to it, but the Maverick is happy to take that risk. Mavericks also can be very secretive. They're secretive about how much money they've got, what their gains are, what their losses are. Now, in terms of how it blends in with me, because I've got the accumulator, my accumulator again would not allow my money to go up and down like this. So I understand financial risk. I will take financial risk, but I won't take an extreme risk at all because I would have a concern about losing money. Unlike the Maverick, who will only be looking at, well, there's such an upside here, my accumulator would kick in and say, not likely. That's too big a risk. So it's interesting that although accumulator is number 2, my accumulator controls number 1 and number 3 in my personality, so that a lot of the ways I'm feeling I've got quite a nice balance going on. And there's a wonderful saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So how you do money is how you do other things. These personalities aren't just in relation to money. So I started to think, what other example can I give? And I thought I'd give you an example of if you were training for a marathon. I mean, I did train for a marathon a long time ago, but if someone with these personalities signed up now and they want to run a marathon in 6 months' time or whatever it is, the accumulator loves processes. The accumulator would do a lot of research, find however many training plans as to how do you train for a marathon, and the accumulator would follow it. The accumulator would follow it to the record. So, day 1 is probably run for 20 minutes. That's what the accumulator is going to do. Day 2, I don't know, run for 25 minutes. accumulator is going to do that. Accumulator is very slow and steady, wins the race. And the accumulator is going to be very happy to come in at, a reasonable time. The accumulator isn't going to set out to break any world records. Maverick, though, Maverick would not look up a training plan at all, because Maverick always wants to find their own way and believes they know better than everyone else. So what the Maverick would do would be day one, probably, I don't know, go out and run for an hour. Come back and think, day two, yeah, I did an hour yesterday. I'm going to do an hour and a half today. Day three, they probably can't walk. So, remember we spoke about money goes up and down. This would be what the Maverick would do, doing training for the marathon. And then maybe day 3, 4, 5, they couldn't do anything at all. They could hardly walk. Day, I don't know, 6, when they go back to running, they're going to go out and run an hour. Again, they're not going to do something, slow and steady. This is because the Maverick always wants to do stuff differently, always feels they know a better way. The celebrity, if the celebrity was training for a marathon, they would probably be recording themselves, videoing themselves, putting it on social media, because what they want to do is show everybody else, look what I'm doing. This is all about getting, other people's loving you and admiring you. They'd be recording it all. So that's designed to be an example of, these personalities aren't just in relation to money. They're going to show up in other areas of your life as well. And Maverick, even though it doesn't show up hugely in money, shows up in a lot of other areas of my life where I tend to be at one extreme or the other. Now, I told you 3 personalities and there's 8. And I told you a reduced amount, like strengths and challenges. If you want to find out more about you, there's a sign up here on my website, marywaring.co.uk/quiz. Now, I think it's probably going to take about 15 minutes. There are a number of questions where you mark it from totally agree to totally disagree. So I do have to say, be honest. Don't try and work out what's the right answer, because there isn't a right answer. And don't think, well, I can't mark I agree with that, because that might show me to be not a very nice person. If you don't do it honestly, the output you get is going to be less helpful. What you will get is a list of your 8 personalities in the order from the strongest to the weakest. And then over the course of a couple of days, you get some information about your top personality. Now, when I work with clients, I look at the top 3, but it wasn't possible from a technical point of view to work out how you give people information about the other ones. So, yeah, if you go and sign up, it's free. If you go and sign up, you'll get information there, which I hope is going to be really useful. Now, we're going to open up to questions. Alison had said at the beginning, if you fill your questions in on the Q&A at the bottom, nobody else is seeing your question. We're not going to mention anyone's name. So if you've got a question you're not keen for other people to know you're asking it, nobody else is going to know it's you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, actually, and we're going to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, Mary, we do have a couple actually.
Oh, lovely.
So, is it just the messaging when you're growing up that influences your personality in terms of money, or is there anything else?
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot to do with the messages you're hearing. It's a lot to do with the emotion around money. Because remember, I said if you hear a lot of arguments around money, and that argument could be that one parent likes to spend, one parent likes to save. I've had a lot of clients with this. you get really confused around money. But what you do know is money causes what, not what you know, what you believe money causes problems. So it's your exposure to money. And remember, that there are a lot of studies that this happens prior to age 7. So there's a lot going on, which is why I said for people with children, grandchildren, just be aware of the words that
Mm.
you're using.
Okay. And how does that feed in? I mean, in my world, sometimes I suppose stereotypically it's women who come into money after a divorce, and quite a large sum of money actually. So how does that feed in terms of, they may have had a lengthy marriage where their husband's been in control of the relationship and the spending, etc. When you're working with people in that situation, how does the personalities then feed in?
Well, I have come across so many women who get a large settlement, like you say, and they have a fear of spending. And this is it's partly because, of course, there's a lot of logic behind that. There's no further money coming in. But this is one of the reasons why I've done the training on the personality is that I had clients who you could show them cash flows that showed you were not going to run out of money, and they couldn't take that on board. And that's what made me realize that you can't try to apply logic to something if someone's already got a belief, a different belief in their head. And that's the issue, that a lot of people worry that they haven't got enough money, even if you prove to them they have. And I had the example just yesterday, a new client I spoke to who's had a large settlement because her first thought is, I haven't got enough money. She has pared back her spending as low as possible. Now, if you don't have enough money, that's a really sensible thing to do. But the conversation I had with her was, there's a big issue here that you might get to age, I don't, 75, 80, realize you've got a lot of money, but yet maybe physically you're not up to doing all these long haul holidays. And I said, there's a real risk that you're going to get to that age and think, if only I addressed this earlier when I was 50, I could have gone out and done all these fun things.
Mm.
I always find one of my biggest upsets were people who had money and weren't enjoying it.
Okay.
And that's why I just thought I desperately want these people to understand how much money they've got, because they need to be in control of money, whereas the way it was working is the money was in control of them. Everything all decisions they made was based on, I haven't got enough money, even though that wasn't the truth at all. And it
Okay.
shows how years and years and years later, we're still impacted by what we learned at an early age. But same as me, I believed from an early age you have to have loads of money. But actually, that didn't make me happy. Nice to have money, but I wasn't happy because of the money. I was unhappy because I was worried about, well, I haven't got enough.
Mm. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so another question. How do you encourage people? What tools do you use if they're in that mindset of not spending, even though they have sufficient to do
Yeah.
so? How do you encourage people
Well,
to?
I go
Yeah.
through a long process with all my clients. Now, someone who has concern about spending, there's no point saying to them, go out and spend a fortune. They're not going to do it. But you can do it slowly, can't you? You can spend a little bit. And actually, an example I had, which was the other way round, from someone did earn a lot but was spending crazily. I mean, she wasn't going into debt, but she was spending crazily and was aware. she was spending crazy and wanted to stop it, you know, and the conversation comment I made earlier, it's not about the money. Hers was about there was a whole load of other issues that she was dealing with, that she was unhappy with, and this is how she dealt with it by spending. And what I did with her is we set a budget that she was happy with, that you cannot spend more than this in every week. And we had an agreement she would, because she used to at night be on her phone buying things. And so we had an agreement she could only spend money on a Tuesday morning. So any time up until midday, so that if she saw something during the week online, she could put it in the basket, but she couldn't buy it until Tuesday. And so that come Tuesday, she knew what her budget was. And if she didn't spend all her budget this week, she could carry it forward to next week, but she couldn't borrow from a food. And I've got to say, it took her 2, 3 weeks to get on top of things. That's all, because she then realized she'd put this stuff in the basket during the week, and then it got to Tuesday, and she thought, I don't really want that at all. You know, and we were addressing other issues, but it had just become habit for her to sit there, you know, buy, and stuff would turn up that didn't suit her, didn't fit her, and she didn't send it back. And it's the same, you know, people who won't spend money, you have to encourage, you know, the whole slow and steady. Well, I want you to go out and spend, you know, agree, but I want you to go out and spend an amount that's just outside your comfort zone, and you need to do it. And you need to do it. And I had to go through, well, not had to, I chose to go through this, to spend an amount of money which was making me feel a little bit ill. But because I thought I've never spent this amount of money on that. And it, you know, we're not talking about huge amount, but it was an amount that I was uncomfortable spending,
Mm.
but I had to do it. And it made me think, and you come back. And actually, what I bought, I did buy this most beautiful, beautiful purse. Can't even, it is a brand. I can't remember what brand. And I love it. And I love it now. But I was very uncomfortable in the shop
Mm.
buying
Okay.
it.
Okay. So is there a stereotypical personality? Is there one that if you average everybody out, most people are, or does it not work like
No,
that?
it varies. A lot of, well, I don't know if this is a lot of women or it just so happens to be people that I've worked a lot with. One of the personalities which I hadn't put up is nurturer. The nurturer, the name implies you're always looking after others. So the nurturer, actually, in my example of the person who gifted the money, the nurturer would gift money generally if they received it. The nurturer is the type of person who in business um, doesn't charge what they're worth because they're so concerned about looking after the other person. And they'll think, no, they can't afford to pay X without knowing this at all. They decide the other person can't afford to pay it. And so they don't charge the proper price. And one of my clients I worked with was very high in nurturer, looked after her clients so incredibly well that she had hardly any money herself. And again, you know, I worked with her as to how do we address this. And one of the things she told me later, which I just loved, was she used to have, you know, she did coaching with clients, she used to have ongoing clients, some of whom would often contact her saying, oh, I just want to pick your brains. Can I speak to you about XYZ? And having worked with her as to what is the value you're giving and why would you give that away undervalued? And you've got to look after yourself as well. She told me that she then used to say to people when they said, you know, can I pick your brains or whatever it was, she said, is this a really quick conversation or is it a paid for schedule? And I just thought, yeah. And of course, she wasn't rude, that, you know, very sensible. But again, I couldn't say to her, this is what you need to say, because it
Mm.
would sit comfortably with her. She
Mm.
had to come to that herself, realizing that looking after everybody else so well meant that she was struggling and her partner wasn't working because of a health issue. and they often ran out of money before you got to the end of the month. Whereas if she charged a sensible price to start with, everybody's happy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, another question that's come in. And this says, I can't remember the name of the personality type, but would someone who is stingy with money be much more likely to end up in a very acrimonious divorce, refusing to part with a fair amount of money, and be more likely to be economically abusive to their partner? Or is it more to do with a narcissistic or controlling personality type?
Well, there is potentially a high probability that an accumulator would fear letting go of any money on divorce. I'm not saying the accumulator is going to get very nasty about money, but when you're looking at what's the emotion going on, while one party thinks they're being fair, saying I should have X, the other party isn't being deliberately unfair. It's just their personality that they're feeling horribly panicked about not having money. So even though you might think on your side of the coin, what I'm asking for is fair and they're still going to have loads, the fact is the money's gone down. And that could be making them feel really, really uncomfortable. Now, you've obviously got to be fair but it's just in a narcissistic situation, I don't know what the answer is. In if you get on quite well with one another, you might at least be able to understand what's going on. So it's not necessarily your partner deliberately being mean. It is your partner having that internal panic of, I'm not going to have any money left. And so they're looking from their point of view, how can I cope financially if I share X amount of money? They're not necessarily being mean.
Okay, okay. I mean, something else that we experience fairly frequently is people who inherit a sum of
Yeah.
money, close family members or close friends, and then actually don't want to take ownership of the money because, to use one of the things that you brought up, which was guilt in terms of
Yeah.
receiving that money. Again, how do you deal with that when someone's in that situation?
Well, I did have that instance. I had a female who lost both her parents at a young age. So she was orphaned at, I can't remember what age, but young. She received a large inheritance. I think each parent had life assurance, which of course that money came to her, and she hated that money. It sat in a bank account and well, I was going to say she ignored it. She panicked about it constantly because somehow she felt that she'd go in there one day and the money wasn't there. But she wasn't spending the money because it was almost as though she gave up her parents and got this money instead. And of course, that is not the choice she would have made, but she ended up with the money. And again, just worked with her. It was nothing to do with the money. It was to do with lots of other things going on, but worked with her, working through what the stories were in her head. And of course, the story was, she chose to have money rather than her parents. Now, that's not true at all. But yet she viewed the money as dirty money. She
Okay.
didn't want it. And it was interesting that I think at the beginning, she used to go in and check her bank account, 10, 15 times a day, just thinking that money wouldn't
Yeah.
be there. And again, in a short time, she just wasn't checking the bank account because, she knew that money was going to be there. Nobody was going to, but it wasn't even as though she thought someone was going to go in and do any fraud. It was almost as she thought the money just was going to disappear. But yes, it's because she held that belief. She chose to have money rather than her parents.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'm mindful of the time, so other questions we will respond directly to you. I want to thank Mary today. I'm sure everyone will agree. Absolutely fascinating area, and we could talk about this for hours actually. Do feel free to take up Mary's quiz. And obviously, if you've got any questions, our contact details are on the screen.
Well, I'm trying. Oh, there they are. I was just going to say, I'm trying to get them up and I couldn't see them. Okay, got them.
There we
Technology.
go. So yeah, so feel free to contact us if you do have any questions. And as I say, take the quiz. It's absolutely fascinating to see what the results are. So thanks very much, everyone, for attending, and thanks again, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison, and thank you everyone for turning up and hope you learned something.
Thanks very much.